Hey there guys, this is Obsidian Chill. Got another video for you today. Now what I thought I'd do with these survival mode videos, because obviously they're going to be on the lengthier side with just how long the rounds are. Even clipping it, they're still going to be pretty long. And it's not necessarily something that's going to interest all of you guys on this channel, just that being a high run survival mode. So there's no point in me just doing the round highlights and just music in the background. That's not something that everyone's going to take away from. So what I thought I'd do is each one of these videos have a talking point for it. So at least there's kind of a conversation going on, and you basically have footage in the background just for kind of something to keep your attention. Now what I thought I'd do is in this video you're going to see around 26, 27, and 28 clips, as well as my talking point discussion, which I'll get to touch on in a moment. I've got 29 recorded, which I'll find something else to talk about, and then I've got, well, eventually when we complete round 30, which we are presently on right now, I'll have most likely I'll use the round 30 video as like a summary for SM and what to expect, what went wrong, what went good with this survival mode, kind of like an overall summary with it. And 29 I'll figure something out. But with this video I wanted to touch on going more into depth with the whole like precision versus might, the disparity that's kind of magnified by this survival mode, because the whole might versus prec has been around for a while, since the Venomous dispenser came out, but this survival mode has greatly magnified it. Not so much highlighting things that weren't already there, it's just bringing it more into focus. Like you've got the stigma in the community where they don't want might DPS for SM. The LFG groups are saying please be only prec, or they're kicking you if you're not a prec DPS. The whole aspect with battle support roles. So it's just everything that's kind of magnified by having a 4-man SM is kind of brought more into light because of that. So let's kind of touch on it here. Now, I will say a disclaimer where I'm not going off like a script. This is basically just kind of talking off the top of my head here. So if I do kind of repeat myself or summarize the same points again, it's not so much that I'm trying to like reinforce a weaker argument or like a weaker debate, which is usually what you do when you try to, reinforce or restate an argument because you don't have an actual stronger one. So you've got to keep relating back to the actual one. But that's not the case here. It's more just me kind of remembering what my talking points are, or basically summarizing it from my own point of view so I can kind of branch off to a new discussion. So if I do repeat myself, I do apologize for that. Just kind of think of it as like restating my opinion or reaffirming it. So let's kind of get into this here. So the whole precision versus might aspect kind of comes down to a few points that are always there, and then a few points that are greatly magnified because of what the content we're running, with it being survival mode. So we'll kind of touch on the actual aspects of precision might, and then we'll kind of touch on the support roles as well. So with precision and might, obviously, since you're using a weapon combo, you're spectral weapons expert, the main difference is you're not using the power requirements that you would as a might DPS. So if I'm, as you've seen in all my guide videos, I can't even barely parse at 30 seconds on single target. There are some power sets that are better for power requirements on single target rotations, but the majority of the good single target ones, like say Celestial, Gadgets, Hard Light, Nature, they're all very power requirement heavy for their single target rotations. So think of it in SM, you are the troller, or say even if you're DPS. If you're running with like a tank and healer and you're a DPS and there's a troll, it's still, if you can barely parse 30 seconds yourself and then you've got a troll, so the troll's pushing up power just to power you for your DPS rotations, where if you're a precision DPS, you don't use any power. So that's really the main issue that's kind of being highlighted, is just kind of comes down to the power requirements. What's the point of the troll having to struggle on power or change his rotation completely? If you need to go in SM just with a power troll, like a pure power troll, just to maintain your own rotations, that's not really a viable. Now I will say, as another disclaimer, this is all talking from the points of like say rounds 20 plus. Rounds 1 to 10, you could have whatever setup you want. You could do whatever DPS setup you want, whatever like might DPS, healer, tanks. 1 through 10 are super easy. Even 10 through 20, you can still do it with, like, you could do it as like a Sork healer. You could do it as like a nature healer, might DPS, whatever. 10 to 20, you may struggle in some rounds, like 15 maybe. There's 14 with Johnny Quick, 15 would be Vampire Lord, 16 you should be fine, 17 you might struggle on Deathstroke, 18 you should be fine with Minotaur, 19 once again, 19 and 20 might be another struggle as well with the might DPS, just because I'll touch on why as well a little bit later, but normally 1 through 20 should be okay. You should be able to eke out whatever setup you want for 1 through 20. But 20 through 30, that's completely different, where that one you need to focus on your actual proper rolls, and that's where might DPS will suffer. So let's kind of get into the second aspect of the main difference with precision might and why the disparity exists for survival mode. Now, with might rotations, there's so many powers and abilities with long animation. Like, say if you're quantum. If you're quantum, you're doing the time bomb animation, that's long animation. If you're doing like something like gravity well, long animation. Heat vision, obviously it's a channel, so that's long animation. And heat vision exists on most might single target power rotations. Gadgets and mental can't use stealth and invisibility in SM because it lags the instance, just like kind of Dark Side War Factory, so that's out of the question. As well as if you've got range issues on both stealth and invisibility. You've got powers like, trying to think off the top of my head here. Well, obviously, you got Plague to Corrupted Divine Light, and then Divine Light Corrupted Plague on Celestial. You've got long animation times for those. Yes, you can still kind of hop around, but it's not like you can consistently. If like Minotaur's charging at you or Soldier's doing a flamethrower, you can try to hop back and while doing Corrupted Plague Divine Light, but you got to cover a greater distance. That's why there's so many tanks using Manbat trinkets, because you need to extend that range. Same thing if you're doing heat vision, or you're doing even like hand clap as hard light. If Lex Luthor is going to do a bunker buster on you, you got to stop completely that rotation and then roll out while being stunned, because the bunker buster animation is going to stun you as well. So, or there's going to be the disparity with munitions. So munitions, you've got chain gun, you've got rail guns, you've got 50 cal, you've got mini nuke, all these long animations. And even in the case of like rail guns, chain guns, you got issues with not being able to cancel properly. So it's not like you can just cancel that power with a block. You've got big channel powers like ice using frost blast. You've got fire using fire burst, mass det. So fire in itself as well, all channel powers. You couldn't even use. I can't think of the power right now. It's the channel one, channeled. Well, even rage, channeled hate. Why can't I think of that firepower right now? That's sad because I think it was just fire. Whatever. The single target channel beam absorb heat. That's what it is. I think I thought of it now. Yeah. So look at fire absorb heat. Absorb heat. You're stuck in the animation. You can't cancel the animation. So that means if you're a fire might DPS, there's no way you could safely use absorb heat. You'll die in absorb heat just in Shadow Gotham Elite on Tala, just because you can't move out of the way of the meteors and stuff like that. Now you expect to use that in SM where you're gonna die if you get caught in a boss attack, where you can't cancel it, you can't stop it, and that's one of your best single target powers. Okay, well, so like think of a fire DPS might perspective. So a fire DPS single target from might, you'd have to use heat vision, absorb heat. You'd have to use Inferno. Like you have all those dots, all those channels. Munitions will be using all those channels. So you've got a safety perspective where you're using all these range abilities that lock you in channels where you can't cancel quickly and react to things going on. Now let's look at precision. You've got flurry shot. You're always jumping in midair in flurry shot. So you could cancel flurry shot in half a second. Any time you could cancel flurry shot just by tapping your, well, I'm not sure what it is on PS, but basically just your jump button. As long as you jump, flurry shot's immediately canceled, and then even the jump animation. So when you jump in midair, you can just roll back. So if you're doing flurry shot, which is already a max range combination, where you might have power sets that have like a single target power that you have to be closer range for some of the abilities. So precision, your max range, have no issues dealing with range at all, and you can cancel that combination at any moment. Any moment you could jump cancel flurry shot, and then you'll be ready to roll backwards, clip out of animation. So if you need to lunge a boss, like say if it's Ultimate Soldier doing a mortar and your tank's not getting the lunge, or on like Vampire Lord, once again, immediately you could just stop. You could just jump out of flurry shot and lunge the boss in like half a second and get the counter to save the tank. But if you're a might DPS, there are some power sets that could probably pull that off, but a majority you're doing your rotation. Like say if you're atomic, you're doing your I'm going to stop naming all the powers because that's like 16 power sets worth of powers I'm trying to remember right now. But you know what I mean. Like you've got the two combos With Atomic, you've got Heat Vision using that. You can't just instantly stop those combos and lunge a boss. You've got to think about canceling it, then you've got to cancel it, then you've got to lunge. You know, it's a multi-step process where with Precision and Flurry Shot, you're already in that animation. You're in the Flurry Shot animation. You're already jumping to cancel it early anyway to get the 4 ticks, and then, or at least trying to get the 4 ticks. That's been my issue. Where if I cancel too late, it's 5 ticks, and I'm not jump canceling at all. If I jump cancel early, it's only 3 ticks, and then I'm losing damage. So I know it's kind of a tangent right here, but it's more be my learning curve to make sure that I only clip at the 4th tick. So, but like I said before, you're always in the animation with Flurry Shot, so at any time you can jump lunging in a counter, you can roll out of damage. There's no powers you have to worry about. So it's just a safety issue where Precision is much better suited from a safety issue to survive while doing, you know, obviously intense damage as well. And they can cancel for a lunge, they can roll for safety at any moment, where Might DPS can't do that. They don't have that same ability. So the other aspect is Might DPS are pretty much set to rotation. It's not like there's a Might DPS where, oh, I can only use like, you know, 2 or 3 powers in my rotation and be completely fine. Hardlight can technically do that. They can basically just kind of rotate between setting power to set the PI, but you could even use the Grim Pet for that to set up days. So they could basically they could rotate between like Grasping Hand Pull and Hand Clap, and maybe like Fan for AoE, something like that. But Hardlight could probably get away with using very few powers. Celestial would probably be that as well. They could just kind of keep like Plague, a Divine Light on there, maybe like one other power. But what I'm trying to get at is Might DPS don't really have free power slots. It takes all 6 powers in rotation to be able to do competitive damage with Might power sets. Like look at Nature. Like Nature's going to use every power they have. Quantum's going to use every power they have. Gadgets is going to use every power they have. Like you've got all these power sets from Might that are actually good at single target or at least competitive, but they need all 6 powers unless you want to drop like a supercharge. And then when you look at Precision only needs really 3 powers. They need like some kind of power to hit for Might single target just as extra damage. Then they're going to use whatever the weapon buff is, and then they're going to use something to cancel the weapon buff, ideally, because you just want to get in your combo. Like take like gadgets for example. You're going to have like, if you're super speed, you could have like Taser Pull, or you could have like Tornado Pull. So you can have Tornado Pull, clip with Battle Display, and then jump cancel with the turret. Or if you want to limp on power, you clip with defib, but that's more like a battle setup. But you've got 3 powers there, and then technically, since you can't use stealth in SM, like normally you do stealth as a 4th ability, but since you can't use stealth, from a gadget's precision perspective, you've got 2 powers completely free. You only need 3 powers to maximize your damage as prec, or not really maximize. That's a bad word, but you only need 3 powers to successfully prec DPS, and that goes for any power set. You have one kind of burst power, maybe a dot, and then basically your weapon buff, and then some kind of clip with the weapon buff to speed up the time that you can get into Flurry Shot. You know, that's like the cookie cutter setup for every power, which frees you up to have at least 2 powers on your loadout that are free, and then obviously a supercharge. So with Precision DPS, specifically gadgets as well, because gadgets, for this survival mode, obviously you can't run 2 DPS all the time. Eventually you're going to need a troll for debuffs, like the Amulet debuffs, that's a 14% debuff. Then the defense debuff, that's 14% as well. You've got the Claw, which gives a 7% resto and 7% dom to the healers and the tanks. So a troll, you can certainly do SM rounds with 2 DPS, but eventually for some rounds you're going to need a troll, you're going to need those debuffs, and basically the negatives of running a troll outweigh the positives of running with the DPS. So obviously you need to be a troll power. Basically what I meant by that. So if you're a gadgets, precision DPS, you only need those 3 powers because you can't use stealth. So that means you've got 2 free power slots to put in decoy. You could put in Amazon deflection. You could put in a distract for like a detaunt. So you've got all these extra power abilities to help your group as well. So if you're like a Might DPS, like say your gadget's Might, like technically you could run decoy, but you're since you're already losing stealth as a Might DPS, which basically greatly impacts as well because you're depending on that surprise attack. But if you're like a gadget's Might single target DPS, you can't really easily drop a power. There's some that use robot sidekick, so yeah, you could drop that, but not always in the case where you could have an extra shield. Like say like a Quantum Prec DPS could always run Quantum Teleport to try to get reses. If you've got gadgets DPS for precision, always running decoy, and like say Amazon deflections. Like say in that Black Manta footage, you have to run Amazon deflection if you want to survive that heat vision. If you're not a tank, you're going to die. If you're a DPS, if you're any kind of DPS or any kind of troll, you're going to die to that heat vision on Black Manta. So you need heat vision, or not, sorry, you need Amazon deflection in your Lotus to survive that. So then, if I'm in my TPS, now I have to possibly drop a power for like a shield or like a utility supercharge, like I'm using dash attack to kind of shield and get reses. I don't necessarily need it, but it's just handy just in case because I want to make sure I get the res. But then you got to drop a power for Amazon deflection. Precision don't have these issues. I can run utility powers as precision to help out without really sacrificing any damage. Where my TPS, I can't necessarily do that with every might power set. So it just basically goes to speak to the utility of what precision can do where might can't, because precision can do more with less. Might can do the same, but it might requires like everything to work perfectly. You need crits, your combos, you need full rotations, where precision doesn't have that same drawback. Okay, and to touch on the aspect of precision might that pertains most to survival mode is the whole like support battle aspect to it. Now, survival mode, obviously, you've got limited options. There's only 4 people. You're always going to have healer, and most likely that healer is going to be out of range most of the time because you obviously don't want the healer to die whatsoever. If the healer dies and goes down, makes obviously the tank's job harder to survive while they're trying to get a pickup, and just in general, obviously there's no healer to shield for the res, stuff like that. So obviously most of the time the healer's playing it safe, back out of range, out of the room, so they're not really in DPS range anyway. You're not expecting a lot of damage from your healer. You're expecting them to keep the tanks alive. Same thing with the tanks. If you're running 2 tanks, then yes, one can be more of like a battle aspect because they're just going for counters. And then obviously your troll or your DPS, if you're not running a troll, has to be heavily relied on for the damage. Now let's kind of touch on the tank aspect first. Like say you're running 2 tanks, obviously in the rounds, you're not really going to need 2 tanks unless you want to really play it safe and like anywhere from 1 through 20. You may want it on on 19 or 20 depending on your tanks for survivability, but it's more for playing it safe. You don't necessarily require it. Rounds 20 through 30, most of them you're going to require 2 tanks. Once again, more for safety, but there's some where you need to kind of ping pong aggro off, hard taunts, tagging hard taunts, bouncing the aggro off the boss, just for survivability reasons. Now, the second tank's job doesn't need to taunt all the time, so he's got plenty of free time that obviously he can just sit there and do nothing, but he can also help the group by doing some damage as well. Now, say the battle tank is an ice tank. What is that ice tank supposed to do from like a might DPS perspective? If he's like a might battle tank, like what is his possible option? He's gonna have to completely change his loadout just so he can try to do some damage with like impaling ice or something, or frost snipe or like ice boulder strike. Like obviously snowball might work as well, but he's got to change his loadout completely with non-tank powers just to try to do some damage from a battle ice DPS or ice tank DPS perspective. Now, if he's a precision DPS, all he'd have to do is just have Ice Bash on. That's it, 1 power. He can have Ice Bash on his loadout, and that's all he requires for precision DPS. He can keep all his shields, he can keep his immunity, he can keep his breakouts. He just has to drop 1 loadout slot for the weapon buff to proc the most important artifact in here, which is the Venomous Dispenser, which I'll touch on artifacts in a sec. So you've got a tank that still keeps his survivability, and all he has to do is put a bow on, or sorry, dual wield, and then he has Flurry Shot, and then he keeps Ice Bash on for a weapon buff. So it's much more practical, or it's actually entirely practical, to have your second tank have some damage associated with him just by running a precision build, and which is easy to spec for as well. He doesn't have to do a ton of damage, but even if he puts on dual wield, which still dual wield's a quick lunge, he can lunge away, he can still counter, and he's got access to some okay decent damage. The other thing is the artifacts as well, so that a tank, not necessarily he may have it, but he can run the Venomous Dispenser, and if he has it, ideally the Sparring AI, which basically each time you get a counter gives you that precision bonus and as well as the weapon DPS bonus on the counters. Now obviously there's going to be tons of counters you can get in SM as long as that main tank doesn't want the counters for themselves for immunity, because immunity isn't what it used to be. Immunity before used to be an actual survivability tactic. You'd get immunity and then you knew you could survive. Immunity now lasts maybe 1 second, 1.5 seconds, if that. So there's not as much emphasis on getting immunity in SM as there was in the past for tanks. So really, it's more just keep the boss countered so that he's on his back and can't really attack you. So the second tank could always get those counters for you with the sparring AI. So he's got sparring AI, he's got venomous dispenser. Sparring AI still has decent attack stats. He's got precision, it's got health. It doesn't have Dom. The Dom is a cog. So even then, the tank could run the cog. The cog's got 3% dominance, it's got 5% health, and then 3% prec. So you've got not a huge drop in tank stats, because if that tank was like a might DPS, he'd have to use like the Tetra, which does have 5% health, but it doesn't have anything else. He'd have to run maybe like the solar amplifier for some extra might. So he's severely hindering his survivability by running a might spec, or trying to a might spec, where he could run a precision spec, have the venomous dispenser, which once again drops stats, but it's I think it still has health, 3% health, and then the sparring eye, which is already a tank artifact that's designed for some extra precision damage. So what I'm saying is that it is entirely practical for a tank. It doesn't have to be ice; could be anything else. To have a battle precision aspect still do okay damage without hindering his survivability. So if that main tank dies, he could take over just as easily. He's just missing 1 power on his loadout. That's it, in place of Ice Bash or the weapon buff. Now, from a controller's perspective, it's the same thing. Now, technically, the Claw is designed for a might battle aspect, because the whole any troller gets the prec buff. They just have to hit recharge, and it's basically a 20% buff. Now, what they weren't getting before was might, because it's only precision and weapon DPS. So the Claw gives 7% might to make up for not getting a might buff and the defib, or your recharge. So most of the time, like in my previous video when I won the Claw, like you can still do good rotations and good damage with the Claw as a battle troll aspect. Once again, you saw in that video that the power that I was using to maintain that. If I wanted the 20, 21k munitions and the 26, 27k as gadgets, I was in the full DPS gear, which I am in some of these clips as well, but I was also using my entire power bar, where here in these aspects I'm not using any power, and I've got access to the Claw for the buffs. I could still have access. I've obviously got the venomous dispenser on, and then I've got my amulet or manacles. I can sub out the third one depending what I need. Now, if I was a battle might aspect, I would have to keep as much might as possible. So I would need the solar amplifier, most likely for heat vision, or just for the might alone. I would need probably like the Eye of the Gemini. Well, if I was in DPS stance, I'd be using the Eye of the Gemini. But I'd want those artifacts to give me as much might as possible so that I can maintain a good rotation with the Claw. With precision DPS, I don't have to do that. I just have to run the venomous dispenser. That's it. So it frees up a lot more availability with my artifacts, because I can either run like a troll aspect and have the proper debuffs with amulet. I could run manacles to survive a bit more. I could run the Dead King to lower my cooldowns on orbitals and on my pets. What else have I run? I could run the Grim Pet. I've run that a few times just for an extra pet target. And so it frees me up with all these spots and availability for my artifacts, because I only have to need one. You only need one artifact to do, pretty good single target damage with precision. You just need the venomous dispenser, and that's it. The venomous dispenser, along with the prec debuff, along with the prec controller recharge buff, gives me all the precision I need. So the venomous dispenser gives me 54% bonus on my weapon buff at 160, and then I get 20% from my recharge. So I'm already getting enough prec that I need with just one artifact. Where might DPS, might DPSing it doesn't rely on just one artifact. It relies on a combination. So either like the Tetra, the solar amplifier, enough. Like if I'm going to be using supercharges a lot, then I need the soul cloak. So it might DPS have to rely on a much greater range of artifacts in combination to do a good damage with, where precision is really just one. That's it. Like, yeah, you could still run the Grim Pet for the 4% prec. The pet damage, you could run like the sparring eyes if you're a tank, because that helps you as well. But it's more speaking towards that disparity, where it's so easy and so much less is required to do great damage with precision DPS as it is compared to might. So you've got kind of like a recap here. You've got max range survivability. You can cancel the combo in a moment's notice if you need to get a res, if you need to roll it away for danger, if you need to avoid attack, if you need to lunge, whatever you need to do, you can do it at the drop of a hat, because you're already in the jump animation. You just have to press your button once, and that's it. because you're already in that spot. And then when you're jumped, you can already be mid-roll if you're like man-bat or something like that to cover the range. You've got the hardly any power requirements required to be precision DPS. So if you're same thing, if you're a battle tank and trying to use might powers, you're draining power that you could be used for shields. So if that other tank dies, you could be on like minimal power, and then you've got no power to actually hit your shields to survive because you used it for damage. Or if you're precision, you don't have to reuse any powers, you just have to use Ice Bash, and that's it. You're not going to drain power on a tank just running like Ice Bash and a shield or something to clip Ice Bash with to do your damage. Same thing with healers as well. I didn't really touch on that because, once again, you're not expecting healers to do much damage. But it's just all these disparities exist between precision and might, but there's so much more positives than negatives compared to might precision DPS. There's really no negatives to precision DPS at all. Yes, you can do a lot less precision damage if you're not doing it correctly. Like say, like if you watch my if you watch any of these clips, like I'm still getting used to flurry shot, but if you watch these clips, either if I tag the flurry shot too long and don't clip the combo, then I'm doing a little bit less damage, or if I clip it too fast, I'm only doing 2 or 3 hits and I lose less damage. So really, like the only negative or drawback to precision is it is a bit easier to do less damage compared to your familiarity with a flurry shot. But I'll say once again, precision is super easy on well, it's not super easy, it's just more like it's more tedious, but it's very easy to pick up a precision DPSing on a controller, just how it works for you guys on mouse and keyboard. For flurry shot, if I like even misclick once, which you'll see all the time because I basically go into like the dual wield explosive shot animation, like when I throw the dual wields, because I misclicked where the timing counted as a hold and it didn't count it as an actual tap. So it's very easy to screw up flurry shotting precision on a mouse and keyboard, which is basically what I have to get used to personally, and that's why there's so many PC users that'll just macro it. You could just macro it and make it super easy, but that's not what I do. So it's just that it's really hard to find positives with might DPSing. Like I would personally say, to go from rounds even 1 through 29, because I'm not expecting 1 through 30, but I would say to go from rounds 1 through 29, I don't think it's possible for a might DPS setup group to do it. Like if no one was going to flurry shot whatsoever, I don't think it's possible to go from 1 to 29 to beat those rounds with a might DPS setup. And that's not saying might DPS power sets are bad. It's just that the power sets that are good for single target, or any kind of rotation that's good for single target as a might DPS, just doesn't work practically in SM. You can't take that risk. Where really there's no risk to precision DPSing whatsoever. And that's really the issue that it's come to in this game. It's just, it's been around since the Venomous Dispenser came out. Like precision was still good before the Venomous Dispenser, but basically the Venomous Dispenser on top of the controller buff kind of vaulted that precision into like the next level. And now the precision has so many buff artifacts like the cogs, barring AI, stuff like that. The Grim Pet with 4% that might DPS don't have access to. So it's an issue that's been underlying for a long time. It's just recently amplified because of survival mode, and that's the issue. So really, I talked about a lot of what's wrong, but I didn't talk about what's good or what's going to be fixed about it. And the really thing is, until we get a weapon pass, it's really not like nothing's going to change. They're not going to change artifacts. They're not going to change. Well, I'd like them to take out the controller buff. I don't see a reason why that's there. But once again, the underlying issues, the precision, aren't going to be fixed until we actually get a weapon pass, and that's something that is going to require a lot of resources from the devs, and it's something obviously not really high on their radar. But hopefully they can see, probably 99% of every group that beats 25 through 30 on survival mode, I would say 99.9% of them are all going to be flurry shotting. So hopefully with this survival mode, they can kind of highlight the disparity between precision and might, and maybe we'll get something that actually will be positive that'll come from it. So I know this is a longer video, guys. If you stayed to the end, I thank you for that. I thank you for listening, and look forward to the next video. Take care, guys. Thanks for watching.